Derica Elwood, the founder of Saving Lives Together, a nonprofit company promoting general wellness and specifically my passion, suicide prevention through mental health. I want to first say thank you to all of those who have subscribed to our channel and encourage everyone listening to subscribe, share, and like if you have not already. Today we have a special guest with us, Shelly Kennedy, talking about divorce wellness. Hi, Shelly.
Hi,
how are
Derica.
you?
Just want to say first off, I'm a huge fan of your show. I love what you're doing.
Shelly, you are usually behind the scenes, but today we have you
true.
on camera.
Yeah.
And there's so much stuff that people don't know about you, but we're going to kind of dive into that today.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah. First of all, how are you?
I'm good. Good. It's raining today in California, so that's a special day.
I know. Okay. Yeah. Also special day. It is a special month, I should say. September is actually Suicide Prevention Month.
Oh,
so
very cool.
You are a special guest to be doing it on this month.
Oh, good. Good for me.
Will you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure. Most notably, and probably why I'm here, is I run the divorce care ministry at Bayside Blue Oaks, and that came about because of my own divorce that I experienced myself. And I was married when I was 28, and I had my son about 4 years later. And unfortunately, I married a deeply disordered narcissistic abuser. And so my marriage was pretty abusive and tumultuous. So just the experience I gained from 15 years of dealing with that, and that ended about 3 years ago in a pretty traumatic divorce, including some domestic violence trials that we had to experience.
Wow.
So now I spend most of my time coaching and counseling people that are going through divorce, primarily in the church, because there's not as many assets or resources for people who are going through divorce in the church. It's just one of those things that you don't do, but nobody knows why or how to keep it all together. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years, just kind of regurgitating the experiences that I've had to help others.
Wow. First of all, thank you so much for sharing.
There was a lot in that, right?
We're going to kind of break that down a little bit.
I learned how to button it up pretty nice and neat for presentation.
You are, but we're going to get into the nitty gritty.
Sure.
How did divorce impact your mental health? So being married at 28, that's already like a stigma of being married too young.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
And then and then having a child.
Yeah.
And then having to go through everything that you had to go through.
Yeah. It's in essence, in a nutshell, it's the catastrophic failure of all your hopes and dreams, right? So nobody in their 20s is like, please, can I have a marriage failure? And there is so when you ask questions like, how did that impact your mental health? There's no part of your life that divorce does not touch. It is half of everything that you have built is divided, and everybody knows half of anything is not a whole anything. So every part of your life is touched by divorce. You'll spend, half the time with your child's childhood at that point on. And not only that, but you have, this person that you make vows with to never leave, right? So that's the person you're supposed to grow old and die with, is now your adversary in many cases. So not only did you lose that person, but most often you embark on a fight with that person over the very important things of your life. So it'll affect not only just your mental health, but every physical aspect of your life. Like, I couldn't eat. I lost a lot of weight, couldn't sleep, couldn't think. My memory was really highly impacted. Because of the traumatic events that happened in my marriage, my ability to regurgitate thoughts or even have a sentence, to be able to formulate a sentence from beginning to end and have confidence in it. That was something that really was affected in my trauma part of my brain. But overall, and I think for my case, my divorce was a little bit more traumatic than some people's might be. But again, there's no part of your whole entire existence that isn't affected when you go through a divorce. It touches and reaches every aspect of your life.
Wow. That kind of goes into, how did you mentally survive that?
Yeah.
So like, how did you get out of like making sure that you're eating, also making sure that it's not affecting your son, also making sure that you are still making ends meet to do everyday life activities?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with some things I did not do, which are very common things that people in divorce do, which is I did not go out and find another relationship, right? So I did not find other ways of coping with my pain. And that's probably the number one thing that I did. Instead of just, it's pretty easy to trade that hole in your heart for another thing to fill it with. And so I was very conscious of the fact that I was not going to do that to myself. And so I really kind of just embraced the void that I had, and allowed myself to, first off, not be a victim of my circumstance. So I then, with that mentality, looked at all the things that I maybe had brought to the relationship, right? So I wasn't responsible for the abuse, but I did find out that I was chemically addicted to the trauma bond that I had. And so I developed over that many years a pretty heavy case of codependency, that allowed myself and allowed my identity to be treated in such a way where I felt like that was normal and accepted and gave grace for things that I shouldn't have. So instead of just looking at my circumstance like a victim in it, I owned what I did. And that really helped my overall mental state, because it helped me to not focus on something I had no control of, which was the other person, and really kind of inwardly focused on what I was experiencing at the time. And then more practical things is I worked out a lot. There's this heavy angst that you feel when you're going through a divorce, and no matter how much talking or therapy or candle lighting and mood listening to music, never helped that part. It was really just expelling that level of angst. I lost a lot of my hair. A lot of the trauma affected just my motor skills. Yeah. A lot of those kind of things that happened to me. But another thing that really helped me too is that I allowed myself to take time to grieve. So let's say you break an arm or a leg and you take time out to let it heal. Mm-hmm. There's a propensity in our culture, and definitely in me, where it's just, you just pick yourself up by the bootstraps. So I would go to trials, and I had several trials that I would go through, and I would feel so terrible, like exhausted. I would have these like trauma hangovers for days afterwards, and I would just start anticipating them and giving myself, that's a sick day. That's if you ran a marathon on a Monday, you're not going shopping and taking the kids out and doing all these extra things on a Tuesday. So when I'm running these emotional marathons, I'm not planning big things the days after, and start really being conscious of the fact that I need downtime to recover from emotionally traumatic events, and giving myself the same grace I would do for that for any other sort of physical healing, like having mental healing time.
Yeah. So how does that look for your son? How did he take it? How hard was it for him? And can you speak to how did you have to make sure to navigate that so it didn't affect him so much as well? You know what I mean?
So that's the double-edged sword of divorce, right? So you have your own personal pain, and then equal or maybe more so is watching your children try to navigate divorce, because they didn't do anything and they didn't ask for any of these things to happen. This is served to them. And so to help him get through it, just creating stability. And then there was a level of honesty of just like, hey, and he was older. So just like, I'm really struggling today. So I'm just going to need a little bit more grace from you. Or just, if I take this little bit of time, it's because I'm really going through some things that are hard. But I think that's the part about being a mom or a dad when you're going through divorce, where you just have to kind of process in the in-between. And there'd be days where I would put him to bed and I would sob, and then I would seek help anytime that I could get it. In the same way that when you have a newborn and you're trying to navigate the mental aspect of a newborn, where you slept when they slept and you ate when they ate, or whenever they had a distraction of sorts, that's when you kind of processed and healed. But not doing that, that's what leads to disaster. But making sure that when they're okay, you go get help. And when, they're doing something else, you can go do something for your mental health. But, he also, one major thing that we did for him was to get him help outside of myself. Because there's always a level where kids need to process and let the steam off the top of their own life, because their life dramatically changes. They could have to move homes, you might have to move home and from your home. And there's just a lot of things that they have to process and go through. And you might not be the safest place for them to be doing that too. And then being really careful not to taint their perception and view of the other parent while they're with them, because they call that actually child abuse. When you're manipulating, even if you're not doing it intentionally, it can be viewed as just inadvertent abuse to do to your children, to make sure that they don't have a negative view through your eyes for the other person and the other parent.
Wow. How did you, so because you allowed yourself to heal, you also allowed yourself to go through the emotion, and then even, just being honest and speaking to your child of like, hey, like, I'm just not okay.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of grace. How did you build up your confidence in that and, to get to kind of where you are today?
Sure. Oh gosh.
I'm gonna make this personal.
Personal
I know you're
for
a
me.
coach,
Okay, good. Yes, I know. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I want you to personalize it towards you.
Well, here's something that was really notable. Because I was a victim of abuse, my job was to create really good boundaries around myself. And this may speak to a lot of people who are going through divorce, but because I was a codependent of a narcissistic abuser, I had to put up what was called a no contact boundary. That ended up being really reinforced later when I had 2 separate restraining orders after domestic violence trials. But initially, before those things were even in place, I created a no contact rule. And since we did share a child together at the time, I instituted what's called the gray rock method, because narcissists need a supply factor or a supply source. And as long as my emotions were being ramped up and my pain and angst was his supply, then I became a supply source. So he would always return to that person to be the supply source. So I would create boundaries around myself, or if I had to have conversations with that person, I would make sure that my emotions were not giving off any sort of supply route. So what that practically looked like was just being emotionally boring. So, it was just about facts, details. And so that way there was no give and take to the codependency and abuser relationship. And even though that was probably more extreme on my end, it works for almost all divorce cases. And when I coach people through that, I'm teaching people how to put up communication boundaries around themselves. And it's not to penalize the other person at all. What it's for is I have to find a place to heal. And my major source of pain and trauma was continuously contacting me, or I had to have continuous contact with them because you co-parent with this person. So I had to be able to find ways to deal with communication and reopening the trauma on a regular basis. So I would just put up really great boundaries around what I was talking about. Also not reliving conversations. So we'd have exchanges and not reliving those conversations or reliving past hurts. That was another thing that I was doing at the very beginning, was recanting and reformulating and just considering, honestly, too many conversations that we were having or traumatic events. Another practical tip of what I did is what happens when you go through a divorce, right? So you have all of these really painful feelings going on. And then you also have to then all of a sudden have to navigate family court or family law codes, and which is not geared or designed for people who don't have law degrees. And so what's really good is to put a pad of paper next to your bed. So that way when you wake up at 3 a.m., which you will, and you have this like great law or case, idea or defense that you need to write down, then do that. So that way you're not mulling it over all evening or night and not getting any sleep.
I'm like, I'm for engagements. I'm scared of commitment. Like, I obviously can't say no. I can't say yes. I get to the marriage point. I'm like, no.
And my talk is probably not helping you.
I'm like running away. I got 4 rings.
You should say that.
I got 4 rings I gotta sell. My goodness. I got trauma in the bag. Listen. I'm always saying engagee. I never follow through. If I follow through, it's out of the door.
Oh man.
It's horrid.
Okay. Oh goodness. Okay.
All right, ready to bring it back to confidence.
Okay.
So I enjoyed that you talked about setting boundaries around yourself and just making sure that you're not emotionally going into it just so you can still co-parent well.
Yeah.
Would you be able to share like some practical, because you mentioned in the beginning of like you couldn't form sentences, that you looked at yourself a lot differently, you were losing a lot of weight. So like what were some things of like, I know that if I do this, this is going to help me build confidence just for you. Like, what did that look like in your life?
Yeah. Well, I think healing is the biggest thing. And one of the ways that so I was born and raised in Paradise, California. It burnt down in the November before the December before my marriage fell apart. I ended up serving for about 4 months in Paradise, California, serving people that had lost everything. And in doing that, I think it really was the most beneficial for me in healing was being with other people that were just going through a massive catastrophic event, and putting myself not second, but not the focus always being on me. And then that way I could kind of heal inadvertently behind the scenes. That was one thing that I did. It was really good for me. Another thing I'm a woman, obviously, but I had given up a career in advertising to have my son. It was one of my life dreams to be, even though I was in the corporate world, to be a stay-at-home mom. And then now at this point, I'm single and I have to work and be a mom at the same time. So I lost a lot of the dreams that I normally had. My trajectory was completely changing. So in that, I would just have to take the time out to recognize that man was not my provider or my protector. Those were two things that really helped my confidence. And I realigned who my provider and protector was, and that was God. Because especially when you're a woman, it can be true when you're a man too, when you lose that life partner, you're reconsidering everything from your finances, your pensions, your 401ks, your child's future, your future, what house you've been living in. Everything is shaken down to the roots of everything. And so realigning for me where my hope comes from, and not in a non-practical way, because I'm very practical. Like, where's my paycheck come from? Does it come from man or does it come from God? Where's my provision and my protection come from? And once I realized that my marriage and my white picket fence life, which was a lie anyway, was not who and or what was providing for me and protecting me, I then became to have a bigger confidence inside of myself, because it was no longer outside sources which were contingent on whatever mood somebody was in, or their ability to stay loyal, or their ability to treat you right. My confidence then was in something that was steadfast. And that really ended up allowing a space for me then to grow in and be upright in, and it created a confidence in me. To this day, the trauma still affects, my mannerisms, or when I relive things, it still is there. I don't know that I'll ever not have those, that triggers. Limp part to me. But I also stopped putting the pressure on it for it to go away, because then I would start to have, anxiety because God's called me to be a speaker. I teach on this exact painfully traumatic event weekly now. So doing that would kill your confidence if every week you showed up and not, weren't able to speak about the trauma. But just allowing myself the grace to be like, hey, listen, I'm not going to knock it out of the park all the time, but God's always going to use what I have to do and deliver his own message the way that he would like to.
Well, and the fact that you're showing up is huge credibility already.
Yeah. You just show up scared. I think that's probably one of the really good things to give advice to, especially single women. Just to give you a practical story, I loved camping, and we had our dream RV trailer, right? But I don't know how to drive or back up a trailer, but I just didn't feel like I wanted to give that part of my life up. And so recently I bought a little 15-foot trailer, and I drive it scared, and I drive it scared until I get confident in it. And now I can back it up, all this kind of stuff. So the difference between not living your life when you're a single woman, that one might do versus what I do in confidence, is that I just show up and I do it scared and I do it scared until I'm good at it, and then that's how I build the confidence in it. But a lot of times, single moms can just kind of make their world go small. Yeah. And that's something that I really encourage single moms to do, is you don't have to do that. You're just as good as your previous counterpart at some things. It's not not dishonoring to, your future husband to have skills that you can do in the single life that you have, but just to show up and do it scared. That's the difference between what I do and some people do.
Well, and you're not allowing that to get taken away from you, right?
Right.
Of like, if you love traveling, just because you don't have somebody to hatch it on or whatever,
exactly.
you can still do it.
Yep.
I love that. What are some things now, practically, would you say that you do to check in with yourself, just to, because I know you just mentioned about like sometimes you do just show up scared, and that the practical of like not allowing yourself reliving it, but like what are some things that you would do now to just check in with yourself to make sure that you're okay?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm 3.5 years out, so I'm less, like I've learned myself through trauma. I've learned my triggers and my reactions. I've been really honest with people. So there's sometimes that really odd things will trigger me. And then my friends or relationships would be like, well, I don't want to trigger you. And I'm like, well, what I want to do is I want to be triggered in safe places, so that way we can work through them. I can work through them together, because avoiding your triggers altogether isn't healthy either.
Right.
But what I can do is create new patterns in safe environments that kind of counteract my triggers in the past, and just allow them to happen, and just being aware of myself, and to know that if I'm feeling triggered in something, what that feels like, maybe what's triggering me, how tired am I, how hungry am I, how alone do I feel, how connected to God am I. Those are all kind of my checklist
Check-ins,
points.
Yeah.
But I think just learning yourself, being single is the one time relationally where you can be the most selfish. And I took full advantage of it. I still do. It's about me. And this is the time that it is supposed to be about me. Yeah. Yes, I'm still a mom, but relationally, my health and my joy and my future is mine to own. When I get remarried in the future, I'll have to share that with someone else. But right now, this is the time for me to be so inwardly self-oriented and to get to know myself. And I found out that I really like myself. I think I'm funny, and I enjoyed time with myself and really kind of connected with myself. And I think that's how my check-ins happen, is like, this is something that's triggering to you, or I'll anticipate triggers. So like I said, with trial, like I know like certain things will trigger me. And then I'll be aware of the way my body feels when I'm triggered from like past traumatic events. But it could be anything. I mean, even just from when Paradise burned down, if it's real windy and hot, I'll feel really anxious, because those were two things that were happening on that day. And I will wonder why I'm anxious, and then I'll talk to God about it and be like, what am I feeling? Because you're made of spirit, soul, and body, right? So you can check in with yourself that your body's feeling off. Like, what's my spirit worried about? Or what's my spirit want to talk to me about? What does the Holy Spirit want to talk to me about? And that's kind of how I run that checklist. But when you've been triggered traumatically on a lot of different levels, very odd things will start to trigger you. So if you start to feel anxious, I'd be like, well, something's in there. What is it that I need to figure out?
Totally.
Not very practical though, huh?
No, I feel like it's all practical, because definitely, like you said, the one of how you're feeling, what may trigger it. So like the fire, you said windy and hot. And so that fact that you understand, like, you have put 2 and 2 together of like, this and this makes me feel triggered because of that. Like, I think it's acknowledging and recognizing. Yeah,
that's exactly true.
What those triggers are, and why you're feeling them, or getting down to the stem of them, right?
I'm really competitive too. So I like to find out what those things are. It's like, I'm feeling triggered. Then it's like, okay, I want to find out what it is, because I'm also the kind who doesn't like to make the same mistake twice. So if I'm feeling this way today, I don't want to feel like this way again. Yeah. So what is it, and what do I need to work on? And then that's how I kind of go after those triggers.
I love that.
I hunt them down.
Competitive with yourself. Self-competitive. I love that. I don't know if I've ever heard that, but it's a thing now. It's a thing. We're going to make that a thing. You can be competitive with yourself. Absolutely. Why not? I want to say thank you so much for sharing today.
Thank you. Okay, good. I was like, didn't know if you're throwing it to me or not. Well, thank you for what you do, Derica. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I want to say thank you to everyone watching and listening, that if you have any questions on divorce wellness, please put them down in the comments. We can do a part 2. If you haven't yet, subscribe, like, and share. I am your wellness coach, Derica Elwood.